Did he fix it?
I mean, there's nothing on my end that indicates a problem. Welcome into another edition of the D3 Datacast. Man, we've been doing a bunch of videos lately, and I've been having a ton of fun. How about we have some more fun? We have a bracket, we have a tournament field. Let's talk about it. We have tournament games to talk about it. Let's do it the D3 Datacast way.
I'm honestly I'm getting a little bit sick of talking to you about this. I hope people love Division 3 basketball as much as we do, though, and they're not sick of hearing about it from us. But yeah, let's get into it.
Before we get to the tournament talk, we have one final regular season top 25 that has released already. How did you vote in it, Matt? Tell us about your ballot.
Yeah, since this is Tuesday, we're usually talking about what I'm about to submit. But yeah, the poll is out. Here's my ballot into it. Trinity number one. I actually didn't look back to see if I dropped them for 1 week or not, or if I stuck with them the entire season. I know most of the season I've stuck with them. They won the NESCAC final. They looked really good all season long. I stuck with them with number one. To me, they're probably maybe would be my pick if I was making a pick right now to reach the Final Four or to win it all. Maybe Trinity would be number one on my list. But really close next to them. Number two, I have Emory. Number three, Randolph Macon. Number four, Chicago. Number five, Mary Washington. I'm kind of considering that all, maybe adding Mary Washington to that top group, considering them all pretty even. But Zach, there's a group of contenders right behind them: St. Thomas, Illinois Wesleyan, Redlands, Gustavus Adolphus. Those teams are all very strong, maybe not too far behind that lead group. So I think that there's a really strong top of Division 3, but we've been talking all season long. It's a deep pack as well. So I wouldn't count anyone else that's on the back half of this top 25 out either. The YouTube viewers will be able to see the top 25 ballot on their screen. But yeah, I'm excited to get to the tournament, and I think it's wide open. I think it's anyone's game based on how I'm seeing the top 25 breakdown going into the tournament.
And it's a fairly uninteresting top 25 because we have a tournament right around the corner. It's going to tell us everything we need to know about uh, how these teams stack up. Um, but let's just start because I'll be honest, the D3hoops.com top 25 poll has come out. I haven't even looked at it. I do know that Trinity, Connecticut will enter the tournament as the number one, but I'm not sure really if how many of the top 25 or of the number one votes they got. Uh, Before it was released, I was thinking it was likely that Trinity, Connecticut would probably get that number one spot back with everything else that happened and how good they looked in the NESCAC tournament. Although I could see a case to be made that some voters might choose Emory. I think probably heading into the tournament, those were the only two real choices at number one.
I think I did look at the final poll on d3hoops.com. I think St. Thomas, Texas maybe got some votes as well.
Oh, that's a good call. I should have called that out. That's a reasonable.
And I think
I
there was
think
three
people
teams
did too.
overall. But as we sit here in front of our computers, no way to actually find out what the d3hoops.com top 25 poll looks like. So we're just going to be left in the dark forever. You, the
So
viewers, though, can go click over there and check it out. Yeah.
let's just talk about we talk about a voter's approach to a top 25 ballot, and I was just wondering if there's any different approach that you bring to this final one going into the tournament. Is it as simple as, hey, you know what? I'm going to go into this tournament and put the team that I think is most likely to win at number one. The team that I would think was maybe the second most likely, I'm going to put them number two, right? And this is sort of a little bit of like a national championship odds opinion power ranking.
Yeah, that's still my approach. That's my approach all season long. The only one that I change is the final end of year season uh, ballot after the tournament. I don't know if those words came out in the right order. It's been a long weekend. Um, but that's the one where then my ballot kind of reflects the story of the season because there's no more games going forward. But up until now, I'm looking at they're going to play these games, they're going to play these tournament games. What do I think would happen if these teams met on a neutral court? If they were in that kind of like Elite Eight in the Fort Wayne realm, how do I think it would go? It's only that last ballot I really flip and take more of a resume approach, saying what did this season end up shaping up like?
Fair enough. I think we've spent enough time on the top 25 with a tournament here just days away. So let's get into it. Of course, we did have the bracket reveal on Monday afternoon. We got a quick reactions video out shortly thereafter. You can check that out for more thoughts on the bracket. But Matt, as we're recording this episode, later that same evening, we've had some hours in between, some time to digest. I'm just wondering if there were any thoughts you had, maybe since we did that initial reactions video, that you want to talk about now, before we really dive into these first round matchups.
I mean, one that we mentioned that's gotten actually a lot more traction on other places as well. I think they were talking about it on Hoopsville. Babson being seated in that Trinity, Connecticut. That's there's work that could have been done to make that more of a more appropriate seed. By NPI, Babson should have been more of like a 6 seed in a bracket. They're treated here like an 8 seed. This is an appropriate first round matchup. Babson versus St. Joseph's, Maine, up there near the top left. I think it's just in the wrong spot. So like, it's not a fair matchup for Trinity potentially in the second round, and it's not a fair matchup for Babson potentially in the second round either, assuming they can get through. Right? You can't ever assume that that's actually going to happen. But Ryan Scott, I think, on Twitter laid out a good path where they could have changed a few teams around to keep the seed lines a little bit more close. We know in Division 3 it's never going to be close. I think I'm going to underscore what I said earlier. If you're off by one true seed line in Division 3, I think that's pretty much great. I think you're doing pretty well. 2 seed lines, not awful, but I think start investigating what you can do differently there. So I would have done that differently. We talked about the mystery flight, getting Mary Hardin Baylor out of the Texas pod into Minnesota. I think there's some good things about that. We like flights opening up to get teams around the country. But if we had an extra flight, that one maybe prevented a rematch. There was, I think, a November game between Mary Hardin Baylor and Trinity, Texas. But another place that we could have used a flight where we're locked in geographically is tying Roanoke to Emory. That one we kind of knew was going to happen, but Roanoke's kind of seated, they should be higher than that. So if there was an extra flight, I know we're preventing a rematch. I think there's good things about that, but maybe consider moving Roanoke as well, because that's maybe not fair to them and maybe not fair to Emory. Again, it's not awful. These are within the, as good or better than we've seen in brackets, even the good ones that have come out the last few years. But if we had the room, of course, there's maybe a dozen things we could do if we had the room, and maybe we only had one flight, so we can't quibble too much. But I would have maybe looked at moving Roanoke somewhere else. Can they get to a Montclair State pod or something like that where they're treated more like a 5 or 6 seed, and that maybe would have been a little bit better for them.
Yeah, I think, just if you look at the top 16 and how they're all arranged, this is
Really
very,
good.
very positive
Yeah.
in terms of sticking true to seeding. Um, and we talked about on that bracket show, just with Trinity, Connecticut, Wesleyan, and Tufts being jammed together. That's actually a great sign because it means we're paying attention to the seeding, right? Um, yeah, I think anyone who has Nescat colored glasses on having a problem with that. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people in Region 10 that are going to be, um,
Yeah.
not going to be very sympathetic to uh, teams being jammed together into a quadrant based on accurate seeding,
Yeah.
right? When you look at some of the ways that teams in California or the Pacific Northwest or Texas have been treated on the years. I mean, those teams are in that quadrant together because that's where the seeding perfectly has them, right? And that's no different than where other teams in these power conferences in the top 16 line up, right? These are all within the top 16. If you look at these pods, they're all placed in the exact right spot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I think, even not forcing Montclair State over to Mary Washington, I think we kept true seeding along those kind of 4 lines as well, all the way through the top 16. I think that's good and positive too. We were able to maybe finagle a potential extra weekend flight away. I think that's really good. And look, I think I said this on the bracket reactions. This is maybe the best, most truest seeded bracket we have seen. Again, we're
Correct.
quibbling
Yeah.
on the margins. I feel like it's on the margins, and this is the reality now of the NPI world. Is every Joe Schmo on the street knows the actual seating. We have the 1 through 64 list, so you can just start constructing. You just write the numbers on a bracket, and so we can all see when it has to differ. Some places it does have to differ, or whatever. When the places where it does differ and doesn't have to, then that's when people like us start getting nerdy and breaking it down. But again, one of the, if not the singular best, most balanced brackets by NPI, by the seeding mechanism. Now we're going to get into the show where we talk about maybe actual team strength, and that's not always going to line up, but that's okay because their job is to seed the bracket by NPI. That's the selection and seeding metric. other things like Massey ratings or Jacob Shower ratings or D3Datacast.com efficiency ratings. Those are measuring a different thing. So you might get kind of quote unquote unbalanced pods from that perspective, but that's not the exercise the committee's doing. The committee did their exercise to seed by NPI. They did a pretty good job.
Great reminder in terms of different rankings doing different things as we segue into taking a deeper dive into some of those first round matchups. Because NPI very much is a resume metric. It's very much um, lining teams up based on, hey, what's your collection of wins compared to your collection of losses compared to another team's collections of wins and losses, right? And for better or for worse, NPI doesn't care if that loss was by 1 or by 20, doesn't care if that win was by 1 or by 20. Whereas, a computer rating system like we're going to use to dive in deeper into these first round matchups is very much going to want to take that margin of victory into account, because you might lose a game to a very, very good team, but if it's by 1 point, that game suggests that you're going to be also a very, very good team. Whereas it says something different if you lose that game by 25. All right, so let's jump into our first quadrant. This is going to be the Trinity, Connecticut quadrant as our number one overall seed, and the Bantams get Empire 8 champion Kuka in the first round. The computer sees this as a 34.5 point advantage for Trinity, Connecticut, a win probability of 99.9%. Kuka with just that 0.1% win probability according to the computer. But you know what? They're only going to play this game one time.
Yeah.
Is it going to be that 1 out of 1,000 that it needs to be for Kuka?
Yeah, you'll notice every other game percentage in this episode does not report any decimals. I didn't want this to show 100-0, so I popped open the one decimal here to show that it's not a true 100-0. Trinity has to show up for this game. And look, someone gets to be the number one overall seed, and that means someone has to be the bottom seed. But I think probably Kuka's, they're not going to play this as just happy to be here. But coming from the 7th seed in the Empire 8 and winning that and getting the AQ, getting into the tournament, that's a great experience on its own. So they get, rewarded with a really tough matchup, perhaps the singular most difficult matchup. And that's the biggest computer line that we're going to look at today. But when it's 1 versus 64, in this case, it actually matched up that way. That's just going to happen. And on your screen, so this is going to be some maybe nonsense numbers to a lot of people. You have obviously the teams, the conference, their win-loss record on the season. The next column is their team rating from our computer ratings, the adjusted efficiency margin. Then their offensive and defensive ratings. The small numbers next to each of those would be their national ranking. Their adjusted tempo, that's kind of how fast or slow, that's possessions per game, their speed. Then the odds for their first round matchup, how likely are they to win based on those computer metrics we have here. And then the computer line is like a fake, you might see like a fake betting line, the point spread that's expected in the game there. So that's the biggest one, 34.5 we're seeing, but not surprised that it's Trinity versus Kuka in that matchup there.
Trinity, Connecticut with a 42.8 adjusted efficiency margin. That's number one in the country. Not a surprise to see Trinity, number one in NPI, number one in the D3Hoops.com top 25 poll, number one in the computer ratings here. Kuka with a minus 1.9, right? That negative number suggests that the computer sees them as a below average team in the entire Division III landscape, with ranked number 233 there. But like you said, a great run, an Empire 8 championship, and great to see Kuka make the field here.
Yeah.
All right, second matchup there at that pod. Well, actually, the first to be played in that pod, though, will be Babson taking on St. Joseph, Maine. This is, a game that the D3 Datacast computer sees as the number 16 team overall against the number 24 team. So this is a pretty strong first-round matchup, Matt. The computer gives Babson a win probability of 57%, 43% for St. Joseph, Maine, and a computer line of 2 in Babson's favor.
Yeah, we mentioned that Babson maybe quote unquote deserved to be treated more like a 6 seed. Our efficiency margins see them maybe even a little bit better than that. So this would be an even stronger team than NPI would anticipate. And then the flip side of that is we thought St. Joseph's, Maine by NPI should be treated like a 12 seed, but efficiency margin doesn't see it that way. Our team ratings has them as maybe a number 24, a fringe top 25 team. So this is a really difficult matchup. Trinity is so good that they're probably a strong favorite in this pod, but by actual total team strength, this is actually maybe one of the stronger pods out there. I haven't actually done that math, and maybe I should to figure that out. But this is really good. This is a really intriguing matchup. Babson versus St. Joseph's Maine. And Zach, this harkens back to our early season episodes, even our preseason episodes, where we were
Oh,
fascinated by the
yes.
NUMAC versus GNAC dynamic with those teams at the top. We thought that like St. Joseph's Maine, St. Joseph, Connecticut, those teams could compete with those top NUMAC teams. We only got one GNAC in. We got two NUMAC teams into this tournament. But right away in the first round, we get one of those matchups that we were kind of talking about all the way back in October and November.
That's a great callback by you. Yeah, and St. Joseph, Maine really has turned it on. They had some struggles, I think, some injury issues.
Yeah.
They seem to be playing really well heading into the tournament. Going to be a fascinating first round game. One to watch, I think, for fans around the country who are just looking for a game to tune in. If this game happens to be going on when you're looking for a game to watch, this is a strong contender. All right, let's move on to Redlands taking on Susquehanna, neutral court game at Hood. The computer likes Redlands as the number 15 overall team. Susquehanna just outside the top 100. Matt, we haven't talked about that tempo number, but that doesn't really factor into the ratings so much, just as uh, in terms of how good or how poorly the computer might see you. It's just a measure of how fast you actually play. And no surprise to see Redlands as one of the faster teams in the country, 17th overall in terms of pace. Susquehanna more towards the average point at 254. So going to be a contrast of styles, which it almost always is anytime that a team like Redlands is involved. Kind of an 80-20 split in terms of the computer's win probability for the two teams, and the computer sees Redlands as a 10-point favorite.
Yeah, the tempo is always a very interesting metric because there's like 300 teams that all play a very kind of normal tempo, and there's not very much spread between the middle. And then there's like a few outliers on either end that play really slow or really fast. Redlands is one of those outliers, although at number 17, that's maybe not as fast as they've played overall. They do pressure a lot. I'm wondering though, since they're so good now, have they won by a lot and maybe they're spending the last couple of minutes taking the air out of the ball and lowering their possession numbers? I'm not sure. Or if they're just playing a little bit differently with some of the personnel, but they're obviously a really, really good team. I think just looking at the ratings for this matchup, Redlands versus Susquehanna, the offensive rating number that you called out, number 17 in the country, 116 points per possession for Redlands, versus the defensive number that Susquehanna gives up, 101.7, just kind of an averagey number. This is maybe plus a fast tempo, maybe a recipe for a lot of points for Redlands to score. We know that they're really good in turning defense into offense. But they can also score in the half court as well. So that'll be fascinating for me to see in this game, is if Redlands can just kind of run away from them if Susquehanna has a hard time defensively against Redlands.
This pod hosted at Hood, who draws Vassar in the first round. Hood has at times been number one in our efficiency ratings for their adjusted offensive number, coming into the tournament ranked as the fourth best offense. The defensive number, though, Matt, outside the top 200, another fast team, though, 34 in terms of their rank for tempo. Don't want to overlook Vassar, but a potential Redlands Hood game could be a very fast game. But coming back to this first round matchup with Vassar, the computer likes Hood, 73% winning probability to 27% for Vassar, but a computer line of 6.5. So so a couple possessions essentially.
Yeah, two fast versus slow games in this pod. But this Hood versus Vassar matchup is a true strength versus strength kind of game. You mentioned Hood all along. They've been one of the best offensive teams in the country. Can't really stop anyone, though. They have like an average or slightly maybe below average defense there at a 103. Vassar doesn't score all that much more than average, but they're really good at defense. I always think of the Liberty League as like a defense first kind of league. Vassar shows that out. They're like a top 30 defense in the country. So you're playing one of the better defenses in the whole country in Vassar versus one of the best offenses in the whole country in Hood. Seems like something's got to give. And then on the other end, like Vassar's offense is nothing to write home about against Hood's defense, which is nothing to write home about. Just a really fascinating game to watch. One to tune in for, just to see like how does that style end up playing out between these two teams on the court.
Catholic will meet WestCon on a neutral court in a game that is, bracketed like a 6-11 game, Matt, and that 11 seed would be pretty right in line with what the computer sees for WestCon as the number 43 overall team. But Catholic, number 10 in our computer ratings, after suffering an upset loss in the semifinals in the Landmark Conference tournament. Maybe they're coming in rested and a little bit motivated. Um, 68-32 split in the win probabilities. Catholic just a 5-point favorite, but kind of an interesting matchup considering Catholic seen by the computer as a top 10
Yeah.
team.
And I have voted for Catholic for a lot of the year, but they're a team that the computers like a lot more than the human voters, and then even more than I have liked them as a top 25 voter. So we'll have to see. I think this is a closer matchup than that, even with just a 5 point line there. A fascinating one to watch. I think the story here will be Catholic's defense rated really, really well. Western Connecticut's offense not rated that great. So let's see if maybe Catholic can just kind of suffocate the Western Connecticut offense. But then the other side of the ball, Catholic's offense versus Western Connecticut's defense, that looks like a really elite versus elite type matchup. So another fun one there.
Host Tufts gets Penn State Harrisburg in the first round. Tufts outside those top 8 protected seeds, but the computer sees them entering the tournament as the number 4 team. Very strong ranking, another top 4 spot here for the NESCAC in terms of the computer ratings. 93% win probability for Tufts over Harrisburg. The computer likes them by 16.
Yeah, and Tufts getting to 20 wins, that 20-5 record after starting 0-2 and then going through a NESCAC schedule. So that's still pretty impressive. They're kind of top 10 across the board there overall, and then in offensively and defensively, just a really good, well-rounded team. Like you said, efficiency ratings like them as a top 4 team overall. Penn State Harrisburg, they won the UAC tournament, but maybe not quite as some of the good Penn State Harrisburg teams of the past, but still I think maybe a dangerous team. Still would expect Tufts to be a really strong favorite in that game.
Let's move on to the Wesleyan pod where NYU will meet Gettysburg. Matt, some really fascinating numbers to look at here. When you look at, how the NYU offense ranks compared to the Gettysburg defense, and then
Yep.
how the Gettysburg offense ranks compared to the NYU defense. Um, Kind of very, similar profiles when you're at one end of the court and the other, right? But kind of just a
Yeah.
team versus team, they're kind of the opposite profile. But put it all up in the computer and it's just about a pick 'em game. 53-47 split in terms of the win probability. The computer makes this just about a pick 'em with a half point computer line.
Yeah, another one like going up to, was it Hood and Vassar, were kind of similar-ish in that realm too. Another one where it's contrasting styles is maybe the wrong way to say it, but contrasting strengths here, right? NYU, really offensive team, good at scoring the ball. Gettysburg's going to lock you down, make it hard to score. I love those types of games to see what wins out. And then this one has the added bonus of being basically a pick 'em, just like a half point difference, a 53-47 game. So the computer takes those two way different styles against each other and says, like, this is still a really even game. So one to definitely circle on your calendar.
I know Lehman was looking for a road trip in their tournament experience here. Not sure they quite get that heading to Wesleyan, but hey, you know what? I'm sure they're going to enjoy their experience no matter where they were going. Wesleyan has 93% win probability odds according to our computer, 7% for Lehman with a 16-point computer line.
Yeah, I think if you're in New York City looking for a trip, getting to Connecticut is like the least exotic place that you can get to from there. So sorry about that, but congrats to Lehman for making the tournament. I know they've had a few tough losses in Cognac championship games, but they get a tough draw here against Wesleyan. Another one of those tough NESCAC teams. The computer sees them as really strong overall. Just 7% odds for Lehman. We've seen crazier things than that happen. With a 16-point computer line, but just across the board, offense, defense overall, Wesleyan looks like a really tough matchup for Lehman there.
Let's move on to the Mary Washington quadrant. This is the quadrant that will match up with the Trinity quadrant on the left side of the bracket. Start there with the number 1 seed, Mary Washington, computer's number 3 overall team. Very strong on both ends of the court. Number 6 offensively, number 13 defensively. They'll take on Worcester State, a team the computer sees as very average in terms of the overall Division III landscape. 99% win probability for Mary Washington, favored by 24 points.
Yeah, and as you're talking about Worcester State being very averagey, it's a good reminder that most of the teams And the two teams that are below average are still pretty close to average. We're at the point where you're only really playing good teams now. You look at what teams, what schedules are out there during the regular season, maybe in like a Massey ratings context, and teams are playing. You just happen to schedule someone that's in the 300 range or something like that. And those games just don't exist anymore. So even a mismatch like this, Mary Washington versus Worcester State, you're still playing a team that's average in the whole Division III landscape or a little better. So that's a good team. Crazy things can happen. But Mary Washington has had just such a good season. They've put it together wire to wire. We were able to see them out in November. They looked great then. They looked just fantastic this past weekend at the Coast to Coast. They beat Christopher Newport in that championship game by like 30 points or something like that.
I believe it was 30.
I think they're playing great ball. And I've, like I said in my ballot, I've kind of elevated in my mind Mary Washington up with that top group with the likes of Emory and Trinity, Connecticut, and Randolph-Macon.
Also in that pod, WPI and Amherst. We've talked a lot about Amherst over the weeks here. They were an early computer darling, showing up as high as number 3 or number 4 early in the season. We had a lot to say about what we thought about that. They kind of fell back down, but got some wins in NESCAC play that kind of really earned their keep. They entered the tournament ranked number 11 by the computer, and actually enter as 4.5-point favorites against WPI.
Yeah, WPI is a team I had voted for kind of off and on throughout the season. They did take a loss there in the NEWMAC, I think, semifinals, but they had a strong season, got in, and had been in that top 25 mix all season long, even if they weren't always in that top 25, right? They're at least consideration. Amherst is a team that had a really funny year. They ended up really high in the efficiency ratings. They ended up as a no sweat at large team in NPI. And yet, outside of our kind of early computer season risers and our conversations we've had of are they legit or not, have they factored into the national conversation whatsoever?
I was just wondering, have they gotten a vote in the top 25
I'm not sure.
all year?
It seems like they've been pretty high in NPI and really good by at least our computer ratings. I don't know off the top of my head where they are in Massey ratings, maybe not quite as high. But
it's the kind of name recognition
Yeah.
that you would think, like, as long as they seem like they are good, they're going to get votes, right?
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah, and it's a tough game. They could easily lose, and then people would just say like, "Oh man, maybe Amherst wasn't good after all."
Right.
But it's just like one of the, and I still don't even know. Right, 18-7. You look at their schedule. Like I don't even know if they are great or not. But it just looks like by all the metrics, they've had a good season, and yet no one's really talked about it. I feel like no one really has believed in them. Not really trying to give bulletin board material. I just has struck me in the last couple of weeks that they really haven't gotten a lot of national chatter. And yet the computers, for whatever system, seems to like them pretty well.
Well, because they got that early lofty ranking because they were beating up on a weak schedule, right? And then they went to Vegas, took some losses, and it was like, okay, well, here's, this is what we all knew they were overrated, right? But then they got some good wins in NESCAC play that showed they are capable of beating really good teams, right? So it just goes back to what you said. It's kind of a very strange season. And you know what? We've got a tournament here.
Yeah,
And
let's
if
play
they
it
make
out.
a run, then there'll be no questions.
Yeah.
But like you said, they could lose this game, and then I think that would lead to some conclusions that still might not even be totally
It's so
accurate.
hard to know. We'll never know, right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Claremont Mudscripts flies to Wisconsin, and they'll take on Aurora. They do so as favorites in that first round matchup, according to the computer, about a 70-30 split in terms of the win probabilities. The Stags go as 6-point computer favorites in that first round matchup against the Spartans.
Yeah, fascinating matchup. I've never in my life considered Claremont Mudscripts versus Aurora, and we're going to see it, and that'll be fun. Different parts of the country, different levels of conference, maybe even. But this is a really interesting matchup. Aurora has been able to score the ball. Claremont Mudscripts has been able to play pretty good defense, but Aurora is one of those teams that defensively themselves is not very good. So are they going to be able to stop CMS? That'll be fascinating. I know Claremont Mudscripts has not really actually taken a lot of 3-point shots this year, so they've been more inside focused. So we'll have to see how just that dynamic plays out there in Wisconsin against Aurora. Just a really interesting matchup, not one that we would typically see just during the regular season, obviously.
I believe they average fewer 3-point attempts than anyone else in the country.
Yeah.
All right. Those two will be playing in La Crosse, Wisconsin. UW La Crosse hosts Hope. Kind of an interesting season for UW La Crosse as well. They, entered the season to much fanfare, looked good early on, had kind of a swoon, got off to a pretty bad, frankly, start or kind of, back half of the first half of that WIAC season, turned it around. They entered
Yeah.
the tournament as WIAC Conference Tournament Championships, get a champions, get a top 16 seed here. They host Hope. The computer sees Lacrosse as the number 21 team, Hope as the number 105 team, 83-17 split in terms of the win probability, and Lacrosse enters this one as 10.5 point favorites, according to the computer.
In Lacrosse's defense, I think every WIAC team took a little bit of a stretch in WIAC play where they took a little bit of a swoon.
Did they lost like 4 or 5 in
Yeah,
a
no,
row?
I know, and but wasn't everyone like 8-6 in that conference? So it was a little bit crazy. But then they went on the run and they ended up, um, you know, really strong throughout the WIAC tournament and down the stretch. So they're good. They did take maybe a little bit of a circuitous route just back to where we thought that they would be all along, kind of hosting a top 16 type of a team. So they're really strong. Will be interesting to see for Hope. I know in the conference tournament, Parker Hovey went down, one of their top players. He did not play in the final, I don't think, at all. At least not when I tuned in. I don't think he was playing. So we'll see if they would miss him if he was not available for the tournament at all. So we'll have to see what that plays out. But Hope had some games against some WIAC schools. I think they beat Platteville, and then they lost on a crazy buzzer beater to Whitewater. So they've played some WIACs and played tough with them. So we'll be interested to see if they can play tough with UW Lacrosse as well.
Another UW school to talk about, Stevens Point, will be in Minnesota at Gustavus Adolphus to take on Mary Hardin Baylor. Another really interesting cross-region game, kind of reminiscent of a Claremont Mudscripts taking on Aurora. But this one, a pretty even matchup. In terms of adjusted efficiency margin, UW Stevens Point enters number 41, according to the computer. Mary Hardin Baylor, number 50. Pretty even 53-47 split in terms of the computer's win probability, just a 1 point computer line.
Yeah, and they're the same colors, so wear your kind of like purple and gold to the game there, and you'll fit in with both sides. Yeah, I like that this kind of fast versus slow matchup with like a top 50 speed team and maybe a bottom 50 speed team. So you have to see which one plays out. But other than that, other than the tempo, these two teams are shaped very similarly with outstanding offensive efficiency numbers and good but not great defensive efficiency numbers. Like both teams are efficient on offense, but they play with completely different paces. Now we're kind of toward the squishy middle where it's only 9 possessions per game. That's different, but that is pretty slow on the Stevens Point side in particular. So, which wasn't atypical of the WIAC until UW Oshkosh started playing fast kind of this year. But that's more what we were used to in a WIAC speed.
It's an all Minnesota matchup between Gustavus Adolphus and Bethany Lutheran. Gustavus Adolphus, number 9 overall, according to the computer, a top 10 team there, very much in line with their top 25 poll ranking and their final NPI. 98% win probability for Gustavus Adolphus, just 2% for Bethany Lutheran. The computer likes the host Gusties by 22 points.
Yeah, and Gustavus Adolphus has been a team that has been rising in the top 25 almost all season long. I think they're a team that's poised to make a big run at it. We'll see if they can do it. I think they're going to be big favorites here against Bethany Lutheran. You see that minus 1.7 efficiency rating. They're one of only 2 teams that are below that below average line. Keuka was the other one that we talked about. And kind of no surprise here, Bethany Lutheran, I think, came as the 4 seed in the UMAC. Keuka was the 7 seed in the E8. So when you get underseeds like that, and I think the UMAC might only be a 4-team tournament. So you get a lower seed like that from that type of a conference, not surprised to see kind of a below average team, but not, tremendously below average. So still kind of a roughly average team, a team that could give Gustavus a game on the right night. So we'll have to see what happens there.
So this quadrant goes 3 for 4 in terms of featuring Wisconsin or WIAC schools. UW Platteville will be at University of Chicago taking on Otterbein. Platteville number 54, according to the computer. Otterbein number 37. Otterbein with a 55% to 45% advantage in terms of the computer's win probability. But just a 1 possession game, 1.5 point computer line.
Yeah, Otterbein happy to be here. They were sweating out the bubble on the last game. I think they were the last team into the tournament. So if the Skyac Redlands Chapman game had gone a different direction, Otterbein wouldn't be here. So hopefully they can make the most of it. And it's interesting here that the 7-10 matchup is seen in reverse by our computer. Our computer thinks that Otterbein is a little bit better team than UW Platteville, but still a really close game, right? 1.5 points, just kind of a bucket either way. So that'll be a fun one to watch in Chicago. If you're a neutral observer and want to get to that game, I think that'll be an excellent one.
Host Chicago will take on Penn State Behrend. Chicago, a top 10 team according to the computer at number 7. Behrend, a top 100 team at 89 overall, but a pretty strong favorite for host Chicago here. 83% win probability compared to 17, 10.5 point computer line.
Yeah, really tough draw for Chicago. Not by NPI where they're properly seeded, but a 15, kind of like that 15 type seed. You wouldn't expect to be that strong. But yeah, a top 100, top 90 team for Penn State Behrend. The type of team that can be dangerous. And if you're like a host like that, you're kind of looking for a game where you can cruise through. That's not really this game here. I think that's one you definitely have to show up for. If you're Chicago, you don't want to be sleepwalking and then find yourself with like 8 minutes to go in a one possession game, because that's where things can go dangerously wrong. So only, for as good as Chicago is, only an 83% chance. I say only. That's still strong favorites. But that's just, I think, how our computer sees Penn State Behrend as actually a pretty reasonably good team there.
All right, halfway through the bracket. Let's move on to the Emory quadrant. Emory will host MUW. We'll have the Eagles against the Owls. Strong favorite here, 97% win probability, 20.5 point computer line. Emory really getting it done at both ends as a top 20 team, both offensively and defensively, according to the numbers, to the computer. MUW outside the top 100, both offensively and defensively.
Yeah, Emory's a team we've talked about all season long. A great team, nationally elite. I don't think there's too much more to say about that. MUW is interesting. Best logo in Division III, I think. The owl logo, I think, is great. Also, it was said during the selection show that their coach commented that they were given a 0% odds by the NPI to win their conference tournament AQ. And I only can imagine that was something that was posted on our site on D3 Datacast. So shouts to the NCAA.com broadcast if that was through their coach's comment. So if that's indeed where that came from, I think that's awesome. We're no strangers to people jeering our odds at us from a podium. So I think that's awesome. So MUW, yeah, they conquered big odds at one point, 4%. Here they're at 3% to beat Emory, and you think of a 16-10 team out of the SLIAC, kind of an upset winner over Webster. There, you think maybe they're not going to be a great team, but MUW here is above average. Maybe won't give Emory a tough game, but you never really know.
Roanoke draws Rhodes in the other game in this pod, and you already talked about kind of this is an unfair spot for Roanoke, who the computer sees as a top 10 team, number 8 overall. That makes it an unfair draw for Roanoke. It makes it an unfair draw potentially for Emory, right? Don't want to overlook Roanoke, and the potential they could lose a game to Rhodes, but again, just kind of looking at this in. I don't know if you're looking at computer ratings can say real basketball terms, but Roanoke is a very, very good basketball team. I think everyone knows that, and this is a little bit of geography at play. And you kind of made the comment earlier, maybe using a flight to get Roanoke, somewhere where they should have gone, and maybe someone else flying into this spot that would have been a little bit more fairly seated to benefit not only Roanoke but Emory as the host of this pod. Anyway.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Roanoke, Rhodes seen as a top 50 team by the computer themselves. A 6-point computer line in Roanoke's favor, 70-30 in terms of the win probability splits favoring the Maroons.
Yeah. Let's start with Rhodes for me. They're such a fascinating team. Outside of 3 wins against Trinity, Connecticut, I don't know that their resume... Trinity, Texas. Yeah, no, Trinity, Connecticut has not suffered 3. Against Trinity, Texas, I don't know that their resume is much of anything, even though they have 19 other wins. But those 3 are really massive wins, and they needed every one because they needed that AQ to get in. So that shows right there that they're a dangerous team. Although overall, number 47, right, by our computer, that's good, but that's not elite in this type of a tournament here. Roanoke at number 8 is getting toward that elite number. We just saw them win an ODAC tournament over Randolph-Macon. They're really, really strong. This is definitely a game that Rhodes could win. This is only a 6-point computer line there on the neutral site. So it could definitely happen. But I think that Roanoke is a case of a team that has played tough against a good schedule all season long, but not always won those games. So I think that's where we see the NPI versus computer rating mismatch is like a close loss to Wesleyan is not it's not a terrible NPI game, but it's not an overall good NPI game. But it's a pretty good computer game, and maybe some close games with other ODAC opponents aren't great NPI games, but they're good computer games. So that's where we get where we are here with kind of a team treated like the 8th seed in this quadrant. The computer thinks is maybe the 8th best team in the whole country. That sets up a potential for a second round game where that team would then be the favorite in this section to get to the Elite Eight, right?
Yeah, but even in terms of they're not here because of the way NPI is treating them. They're
Yeah,
here
it's geography.
because of needing to fill out a
Yeah,
pod in Atlanta, Georgia.
yeah. They could have been by NPI. They could have been treated like a 6th seed, right? So they could have
Right.
been somewhere else, and it is geography that's bringing them down 2 seeds.
All right, let's move on to the pod at Montclair State. We get an early start to the tournament with a Friday afternoon game between Bates and Yeshiva. Bates enters this one as the computer favorite, 64-36 split in terms of win probabilities. Likes the computer likes Bates by 4 points on the computer line there. And yeah, what do you think, Matt?
I mean, I think here Bates is overseeded a little bit. I think due to geography and other NESCACs, they maybe should have been more like a 7 seed, but they're here. Yeshiva, I think by NPI fairly seeded as a 12, but there's not a ton of difference here. I think the computer sees Bates as a top 25 team, but Yeshiva a top 60 team. Look, neutral court, 2-possession game, 4 points. This could go either way. This could be a really fun game to watch. We know Max Nation really is looking for wins, especially a big NESCAC win like that would be great for them. But Bates has been strong. I watched a few of their games in the NESCAC regular season, and I think one in the NESCAC tournament. And no, it was the game that they beat. I think Tufts, maybe the second to last or last game of the season, and they looked good in that. Really fascinating matchup, and I think one that will be fun to watch.
Host Montclair State gets Maine Farmington for their first round game. Montclair State, spent much of the season undefeated. The computer sees them entering the tournament as the number 12 team. Really, really elite offensive team. Number five offense, more of like a top 100-ish type defense, though. 90-10 split in terms of the win probability. The computer likes Montclair State by 14.
Yeah, another really fast team. They use a pressure defense. They turn the opponent over a lot. I think that leads to easy baskets. So I think probably the biggest reason you see their offensive efficiency so high is they're getting layups on turnovers on a fair number of possessions, maybe more than just being purely efficient in the half court, although I think they're strong there as well. Look, Montclair's a good team. I haven't voted them number 1 myself. I think I maybe topped out at 8 or 10. I think now maybe more in the 12 range, but that's kind of where they're seated in this tournament. So I think they have a lot of opportunity ahead of them. I think they can make some noise. Maybe it'd be a fun team to see in like a Fort Wayne type situation. So we'll see if Montclair State can get out of their home pod.
All right, let's talk about a fun game here. John Carroll
Yeah.
will take on Grinnell at Illinois Wesleyan. This is going to be the fastest game of the first round. We talk about all the other how they play overall in terms of their adjusted efficiency margin. We know how good the computer sees them offensively, defensively. This one is about the tempo, Matt. The number 11 tempo and the number 2 tempo. Uh, Grinnell, of course, running the system. They're looking to go fast, but John Carroll may be a surprise to some people that they're the number 11 tempo in the country. Um, so Grinnell drawing an opponent that is not going to be uncomfortable or afraid to play at that pace.
Yeah, if you're an Illinois Wesleyan or Heidelberg fan going to that game, get there a little bit early and watch this John Carroll Grinnell because that's going to be up and down. I think there's going to be some possessions to be had in this game. Grinnell, obviously the system, maybe not as crazy in the system as they were several years ago, but John Carroll has traditionally played fast, and they're still like kind of that top 15, top 10-ish type tempo team in the country. So that's going to be really interesting. And two teams that are they're shaped pretty well, right? They'll both play some defense. John Carroll, though, more efficient on offense. We'll have to see. I'm not totally skeptical of the Midwest Conference, but they don't have a lot of John Carrolls there either. So Grinnell played really well in that conference. Going up against another tough team, though, with a tough defense, is Grinnell going to be able to score the ball the way they're used to in conference play?
The other thing to point out here, Matt, is that let's say this is like an 85 possession game. a computer line of just 3.5 in an
Oh
85
yeah.
possession
Yep.
game is kind of a different thing than a 3.5 point line in like a 70 possession
Yeah.
type game.
And given those tempos, it'd probably be expected to be more like a 95 possession game because they're both trying to push those numbers higher.
Yeah,
So
they don't have an opponent
yeah,
that's trying to drag them back,
right.
right? Yeah.
So it could be even more. But yeah, you're right. That's 3.5 points in that many possessions is less of a big deal than it is in like a 65 possession game.
You mentioned that game will be taking place at Illinois Wesleyan. Hey, let's stick in the tempo category here, Matt, because Illinois Wesleyan against Heidelberg is the number 304 pace against the number 305 pace. But in terms of what the teams have done in the very similar number of possessions, it seems they like to play at. Illinois Wesleyan is the number 23 overall team in the computer ratings. Heidelberg number 145. Not very much of a surprise, right? Because they were a surprise winner of the OAC. Um, Illinois Wesleyan 87% win probability according to the computer and 12.5 point favorites.
Yeah, what's really surprising to me in these numbers here is that defensive efficiency rating by Heidelberg, number 308. That's just not a very strong rating overall. So we'll see if the Illinois Wesleyan offense can take advantage of that. Even though the Illinois Wesleyan offense hasn't been elite themselves, you think they would still kind of quote unquote win that matchup there pretty convincingly. And then the other side is the strength versus strength, the Titan defense versus the Student Prince's offense there. We'll be able to see if they can compete with Illinois Wesleyan in the Shirk Center.
All right, one more pod here to round out the Emory quadrant. Franklin and Marshall will take on Cortland. Franklin and Marshall, seen by the computer, as the number 34 team. Cortland, the number 17 team. Um, that 60-40 split in Cortland's favor in terms of the win probability. 2.5 point computer line.
Really even matchup here, really fun matchup here between Franklin and Marshall and Cortland. Cortland's been kind of one of those unsung good teams throughout the season. I think our computers like them very well. I think they have an opportunity here in a pod that's winnable, let's say. Endicott is a team that has performed well against a not great schedule all the time, but they've taken care of business. They're a team that I've kind of maybe capped out more at like number 20 on my ballot just to see them play tougher teams. So I think that gives a team like Cortland, anyone. This is maybe the most wide open pod in the entire bracket for that reason. We have, I think, three really good teams, and then maybe Newman is kind of outside of that, but could be tough nonetheless. So yeah, I think whoever wins that Franklin and Marshall and Cortland game could have a good chance of competing the next night for a trip to the Sweet 16.
And you would expect that game to be against Endicott, who hosts Newman in the first round matchup. The computer likes Endicott 88% of the time, 13 points on the computer line. Endicott has been a solid top 25 team all year. Kind of knew the situation going in. If they won the CNE tournament, they were going to be in that top 8. But in terms of the computer ratings, just the number 30 overall team.
Yeah, and the computer really likes their offense. They've been able to score the ball. A little bit more skeptical about the defense. And we'll see now that they're away from the CNE into the national tournament. Can that last? Can they continue scoring the ball at the elite level? Can they play enough defense to hold other teams down? Or will we see, other teams be able to get the best of them? Because we know they've beaten Tufts, right? But that was all the way back in November, like the second week of the season. Other than that, they haven't had. I don't want to harp on it, but they haven't had a lot of meat to their schedule other than that. They're about to run into maybe some better teams if they run into that. So are they up to it? I'm sure they are, but they're going to have to prove it, right?
All right. Our bracket review will wrap up with the St. Thomas quadrant. Despite Mary Hardin Baylor getting flown out, there is a Texas pod hosted by St. Thomas, and they will host Belhaven. St. Thomas, the number 13 team overall, according to the computer. Belhaven down there at number 137. Kind of a 90-10 split in terms of the win probability, a favor, 15-point favorite there for St. Thomas against Belhaven.
Yeah, for St. Thomas, their one loss on the season was it 1 point or just one possession loss against Wash
WashU.
U at Wash U in November or December. I forget exactly when that was. So that was a not bad loss. Otherwise, they've been great. They look terrific. They have a chance here to be kind of one of these top 4 teams, make a lot of noise. They have Belhaven, but they're going to be overwhelming favorites in that game. So we'll have to see how deep of a run St. Thomas can make this year.
It is a contrasting style type game if you look at the
Yeah.
tempo. St. Thomas, one of the slowest teams in Division 3. Belhaven, top
Yeah.
10. But the thing about Belhaven playing so fast is you look at that offensive efficiency number, and it's very average there, number 208 overall. So they play fast, but not necessarily very efficiently offensively.
Yeah.
Um, have to see if maybe the pace can give St. Thomas some problems. And, hey, if they happen to give them some problems with that pace and can do it maybe a little bit more efficiently
Yeah.
than how they usually do, maybe that can get interesting. But
And I
I don't know.
think
That's
St.
kind of the only path that I'm seeing there.
Yeah, the St. Thomas has played Concordia, Texas 3 times, who plays fast and maybe comes out a little higher rated than Belhaven. So I don't think that that's going to throw them too much. St. Thomas has won all 3 of those games, but we'll see. Yeah.
All right. A Texas team that did stay in Texas to play at this pod is Trinity, Texas. Number 32 team, according to the computer, that take on the computer's number 57 team. Whitworth flies in. This is kind of a 60-40 type game in Trinity, Texas's favorite, 2.5 point favorite on the computer line.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised to see that Trinity's tempo is only so average. When we saw them
Yeah.
in November at the Great Lakes Invitational, they're another team that is comfortable pressuring the other team, forcing turnovers, getting easy baskets on the other end. Usually that leads to higher tempo, but they didn't exclusively play that style of ball. They would sometimes, drop back. But I thought they were sometimes at their most effective when they were playing higher pressure. So we'll have to see what that goes. Interesting to get Whitworth down there into Texas. I know they're all region 10, or actually Trinity's region 6 now. I always forget that. Maybe I'm just going to stop talking about regions ever. But getting Whitworth into Texas, I think that'll be a fun place to put them. Will be an interesting matchup there. Close
All right,
game too.
yep. All right, we got our fourth WIAC school. That's UW Whitewater taking on Loris on a neutral court. Kind of a 60-40 game here as well. The computer sees Whitewater as the number 33 team, Loris as the number 61 team, and favors Whitewater by 3 points.
Yeah, we mentioned St. Thomas playing Wash U. They played Whitewater at that same tournament, right? In at Wash U. So Whitewater's been there already once this year. I don't think they played Wash U, but they've already been in that gym. But this matchup with Loris, I think, is a fantastic one, right? I don't think UW Whitewater is a shoe-in to get through. About a 60-40 favorite there, but only a 3-point line, so one basket either way that could make the difference. Will be a good one to watch, and two teams that are kind of not necessarily tempo, but otherwise offense defense kind of shaped similarly. That's in Whitewater and Loris.
WashU will be hosting. They'll take on Transylvania, champions of that crazy HCAC race, although one that ended with Transylvania winning a regular season co-championship and then also the conference tournament championship. But the computer sees WashU as a pretty heavy favorite here, 85-15 in terms of the split and win probability, 11.5 points on the computer line.
Yeah, heavy favorite there for WashU, but Transylvania is kind of that top 101 team there. Strong enough, 20 wins on the season. We'll have to see if they can make noise. You would expect WashU to win, but it's one of those games where if you tuned in the second half and it was close, you wouldn't be entirely surprised.
Yeah, I think that's good. All right, let's go down to Mount Union and Washington and Jefferson. Matt, this is just one of those matchups when I saw it revealed, just seemed like a really interesting one to me. Um, and maybe even more interesting than necessarily the computer sees it. The computer sees this as the number 22 team against the number 87 team, and gives Mount Union about a 73% win probability odds compared to 27% for Washington and Jefferson, 6.5 points on the computer line. But Washington and Jefferson, another one of those teams that can bring the pressure, especially in
Yeah.
the backcourt defensively, cause some trouble. So looking forward to seeing how this one shakes out.
Yeah, and to see their 189 ranked offense is also surprising to me because when we saw them on their home court at Great Lakes Invitational, they were pretty hot that weekend. When they beat, was it Maryville the second night? I think they were
Yeah.
hitting their threes, and maybe
Yeah.
that's the difference. I think that's for a lot of teams, right? The nights you hit your threes, you can play with anyone. The nights you don't, then maybe you can't. But this is the type of matchup that they could give a team like Mount Union some trouble. So I'm fascinated to see how this one turns out.
And those two will be playing at Christopher Newport, who will host Stevens. Christopher Newport, number 25 in terms of the computer's overall view of them in the overall Division III basketball landscape. Christopher Newport, offensively outside the top 100, but a top 10 defense coming into the tournament. 86% win probability over Stevens, according to the computer, and 12-point favorites.
Yeah, for me, Christopher Newport had a little bit of a down then up, and then maybe back down a little bit season. In the middle, they had some really, really strong wins. They were playing as well as anyone. They rose back up, I think maybe into the top 10 of my ballot. Seems like they had a little bit of a tough coast to coast conference going out west. I think they played UC Santa Cruz in an overtime game, which they
Yeah,
won.
tight game, and then blown out by Mary
And then
Washington
Mary
in that
Washington,
final.
they weren't really competitive there. So, but they're a good team. You expect them to beat Stevens, but they've also been a team that at times, even though they've played overall a really tough schedule, at times maybe the scores are not exactly what you expect. But here, I mean, Christopher Newport at home, you expect them to take care of business there against Stevens.
All right, TCNJ will take on Johns Hopkins, and you look at some of these computer numbers, pretty even, pretty similar shape. TCNJ, the number
Yeah.
36 team, Johns Hopkins, the number 18 team, but 55 and 54 in terms of their offensive rating, 43, and Johns Hopkins, rounding out a top 20 there. They play very similar pace, but it is kind of a 40-60 win probability advantage for Johns Hopkins and 2.5 points on the computer line.
Yeah, I watched almost all of TCNJ's conference final against Montclair State. They looked great. I think they're going to give a lot of teams trouble. That matchup with Johns Hopkins would be really fascinating. Even though Hopkins is maybe the lower seeded team by NPI, the computer likes them a little bit better. But I think that one's anyone's game, and the line there is only one possession, so that's not a surprise. And I think you'd have to expect Randolph Macon wins the next game, but whoever wins that TCNJ Johns Hopkins match could give Randolph Macon a game there in the second round. Yeah, again, one of the top games, I think, TCNJ Johns Hopkins. Definitely one of those circle. Definitely tune in for at least a good chunk of it just to see what's going on.
All right, we started with the computer's number 1 team. We end with the computer's number 2 team. That's Randolph Macon. They take on North Carolina Wesleyan, who the computer sees as just outside the top 150. Uh, for these teams that are at the upper elite of the computer ratings, they do it because they're very highly ranked offensively, very highly ranked defensively. No exception for Randolph Macon, who boasts the computer's number 1 offense, the number 2 defense. 99% win probability by the computer in this matchup, 25.5 point favorites.
Yeah, and I think Randolph Macon executes with about the best of them. They're not always the biggest team, at least not this year, but I think they play really, really well. They look like one of the slowest teams, 399 tempo. Usually just defensively, they don't give you a lot of options. They force you into tough looks, taking a lot of the shot clock. And then on the other end of the ball, they're going to kind of prod and poke until they find the best look that they can, and they're going to knock it down. So it's just really tough to beat Randolph Macon when they're executing the way that they can. So it's going to be a little bit of a tough matchup with NC Wesleyan. Kind of computer sees it as a 99 1%. So you mentioned for Keuka, could it be 1 in 1,000? NC Wesleyan only needs 1 in 100, though, to go their way to get that win.
All right, so those are all our first round games. Going to be some great second round games, but we don't know what those matchups are yet, Matt.
Going to be good ones, though. Yeah.
All right, let's take another run through 5 of the first round picks for this week's pick slate.
Yeah. So we're going to review last week, Zach. First game was Wabash.
Can I
Wittenberg.
just
Yeah.
can I just say, I know as we review these picks, it was just from last week, but it feels like these games were a month ago.
It feels like it because they were mostly like Wednesday games because we didn't know the conference tournament matchups. Anyway, Wabash was 3.5-point underdogs at Wittenberg. Wittenberg won that game bigger, so we both missed that one. Elmhurst and Carroll. Elmhurst were 2-point favorites. They won by 10. We both got that one. York and Albright was a double overtime game, but York covers the 1-point line. So Zach, you get that one. Stockton.
Yeah, I knew that they would pull it out in double overtime.
Yeah, of course. Stockton and TCNJ was our fourth game. TCNJ were 5.5-point favorites. They won by 10. Zach, you won that one. And then our game of the week was UW Oshkosh and Platteville. Platteville were 4-point favorites, but they won by 7. And my bubble's not shown, but did I get that one?
Click. Yes.
I got that one. Okay, click. Yep. And so that brings you were 3-2, you're 41, 42-2, so you're almost back to 500. I was 2-3, 47, 36, and 2 for me. So you're just a little bit more than 1 week separated from me at this point. But I've had a long string of sub 500 weeks in a row, so I've allowed you to catch up some.
Yeah, now I'm starting to understand why you wanted to leave it at 5 picks for this week instead of making it a double 10 pick slate.
Well,
okay.
That's normal. That's normal. 5 picks is normal. All right, so Zach, here's our first round games. First one is Yeshiva at Bates. No, sorry, versus Bates. This is neutral court. 4-point line favors Bates. What's your pick?
I think this is the exact type of game that Yeshiva plays the non-conference schedule they do for,
Okay.
right? Um, so yeah, getting 4 points here, give me Yeshiva, right? I think
Okay.
that, that non-conference schedule is to prepare them for a game like this, right? And they've gone through it. They, took some lumps, but, got a couple of wins as well. They're not gonna be, shocked by anything they're gonna see from a
Yeah.
NESCAC opponent. They've played the best teams in NESCAC before.
Yeah.
So, give me 4 points to work with here, easy pick.
Yeah, I'm going to pick pretty similar. This is a neutral court game. I can see it going either way. So giving me 4 points, yeah, I'll take that one. And I mean, again, I think it can go either way, but I'm just going to basically take the points here and run and say it's going to be a close one. All right, we mentioned the fast game here being played at Illinois Wesleyan. It's Grinnell and John Carroll. The 3.5 point line favors John Carroll.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with John Carroll here, Matt, but am I allowed to say that I hope I'm actually wrong with this one?
Oh,
And,
you're against
not
John
not
Carroll.
no, 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 hold
Okay.
on, hold on. 3.5 points here. I'm just saying that I hope I'm wrong because it's at least within those 3.5 points,
Okay.
because that means this game is really giving us the maximum excitement factor that I think going in, it has the potential to give, right? And so that definitely plays out if I'm wrong on this pick. But that being said, I'm going to go with John Carroll laying the 3.5.
Okay. I'm also going to go with John Carroll. That being said, I think Grinnell is good. I think they're legit good. I think it's nice to get them in this kind of off game. So I think so often they'd be like at Illinois Wesleyan or at UW Platteville in the first round game, and it's a really tough matchup. Here's an opportunity for them to win. That being said, John Carroll going through a really strong NCAC this year. I just think that they're a little bit more tested right now, and in this type of environment, I'm gonna lay the 3.5 points and say that John Carroll can cover that. Okay, we mentioned this one as sneaky fun. It's Cortland being actually 2.5 favorites versus Franklin and Marshall. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, I'm always wondering if you can overreact to kind of the last impression we get of teams heading into a tournament, right?
Yeah.
Cortland did a great job winning the SUNYAC tournament. Franklin and Marshall, they were the Centennial 4 seed and lost, I believe, pretty convincingly in that semifinal, right? So it's a great last impression in the regular season from Cortland, not so great from Franklin and Marshall. So 2.5 doesn't feel like a lot to lay on that. But I feel like Franklin and Marshall is always one of those kind of tough teams to figure. And I've said in the past that I think, especially last year, I wasn't giving them as much credit as they probably deserved. But I just never know quite what to think about them. So again, maybe I'm overreacting to those final impressions heading into this week. But give me Cortland.
You just articulated two things that resonated with me, although I wouldn't have thought of them in the same way. Franklin and Marshall being a hard team to figure. It seems like every time I'm convinced that they're legit good, they go in and lose convincingly. And every time I just write them off, then they go on the string of wins. And I didn't really realize that until you said they're tough to figure. And then you also said maybe we're overreacting to Cortland, which is what we just saw. I think, this is 2.5 points. I'm going to go Franklin and Marshall. I think that because they kind of maybe got bounced from the Centennial sooner than they wanted to, I'm kind of doing the up down method. I'm like
Up down, yeah,
they're
yeah.
gonna
I
lock
mean,
in and they're gonna be ready to go. This is a tough game, especially since they're underdogs, right? They don't even have to win for me to cover, even though I think they can.
not a lot of points to work with, but okay.
All right, Johns Hopkins versus TCNJ. Johns Hopkins 2.5 point favorites in this one.
Okay, so I feel like maybe the hard to figure thing is just a Centennial Conference thing because I have some very
Yeah.
similar feelings about Johns Hopkins
Okay.
as I articulated with Franklin and Marshall. Um, a- a- and again, TCNJ left a very good final impression heading into this tournament. Uh, but give me the 2.5. Give me TCNJ.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go with TCNJ as well. Again, I might just be reacting to me watching that whole game against Montclair and their kind of comeback, staying in it, being able to win that game. They looked tough. They looked like they would give a lot of teams trouble. So I think TCNJ is legit and ready to roll. But as far as the Centennial goes, maybe it's just that there's a lot of good teams there. So you're going to take losses, and at times it feels head scratching, like no one can figure it out. But maybe it's just that there's a bunch of good teams. But that's kind of been the case. Maybe not as much this year, but in the NJAC in the past, TCNJ has now beaten Montclair State twice. I think that's pretty good. So I think they're not going to be scared for whatever Johns Hopkins throws their way. Okay, then we mentioned this fun cross-regional game, Mary Hardin Baylor, just 1 point underdogs versus UW Stevens Point. Your pick.
Yeah, it's a neutral court game, but with Mary Hardin Baylor traveling to Wisconsin, it's gonna, I don't know how much you really want to consider that neutral because that's going to be very much in Stevens Point's favor. However, I'm going to go with Mary Hardin Baylor here.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm super convinced of that, but I know Stevens Point did have an injury situation during the course of the year, so I just feel like maybe there's an opportunity here, um, where the computer line is based on the
Sure.
full season of work, and so maybe it's just a little bit of smart money uh, to kind of ignore that full resume that goes into the computer line and try to look at a little bit more of like in the moment type thing. Um, and I think we've seen Mary Hardin Baylor play really well at times. And so hey, this will be a fun one to watch. Give me Mary Hardin Baylor.
It's been a long week. Whenever
Give
I
me
make
Martin
my
Van Give me Martin Van Buren.
That would definitely be a D3 college's name or something. When I make my picks, I just look for a reason to justify it to myself, and then I make my pick and I move on. I know Mary Hardin Baylor plays kind of like a national schedule. They're no stranger to difficult games. They're kind of tested. But I also think of like a WIAC team, and I can just say they've gone through the WIAC schedule. They've played. Oshkosh played fast. They were a good team. They've played them. They've played UW Lacrosse, who's almost, been as strong as anyone. UW Whitewater's been good. This whole schedule is a gauntlet. They've played it. They're not a stranger to tough teams. That's what I use to justify to myself to take UW Stevens Point to win this one. But I'm going to make the pick.
Can I play devil's advocate just for the sake of what I think is a fun discussion opportunity here?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's been a long season. You talk about that gauntlet. Is there
Sure.
something to be said for entering the tournament having gone through that gauntlet compared to Mary Hardin Baylor, who had a very front-loaded schedule? They got into ASC play and they were playing one game a week. Now
Yeah.
I know they did have a reschedule, right? It's just an interesting dynamic that they've had one game per week for what, the last 4 weeks,
Yeah.
something like that, right? So they had an opportunity to maybe not put as much wear and tear on the tread as some of these other schools that had to go through a real gauntlet.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe a counterpoint. Then you have the rust factor.
A
Are,
counterpoint. I mean, let's be.
are they
It's not like they
rusty?
haven't been playing. It's not like they had a 3-week layoff.
I sometimes think if you play a tough conference tournament, especially if you have like a Friday, Saturday back to back, and then you got to get on a bus or a plane like midweek to get to your tournament game. Stevens Point, I'm trying to think. They lost. Did they lose the semifinal or the quarterfinal now? So maybe they played Thursday night. So they had a little bit extra rest. They had a gap in between, I think, their semifinal and their final. I think they lost Thursday night, if I remember correctly, which was the semifinal. So I don't think that they're dead. I don't think their legs are, gone, is what I mean to say. So who knows? Whatever result, we can say that was the answer. All right, Zach, we got to get out of here, I think.
All right, finally, this game will give us the answer to the age-old question of rest versus rust. All right, let's get out of here. Thank you to this great group of supporters you see listed on the screen. They have partnered with us to really go on this journey with us as supporters through the Patreon platform at patreon.com/D3 Datacast.
Yeah, appreciate the support. It allowed us to put the data on ad-free on the website all season long. Patreon.com/D3 Datacast if you want to select a $3 or the $5 a month tier. We'd just be so grateful to have you. We're grateful to all these people on the list here. Zach, ready to have a fun tournament. Maybe another episode or two this week, so stay tuned. But for now, we're going to say, good job, team.